Good evening, survivors. Or maybe it's morning where you are. I don't know anymore. Time has stopped being something you can track on a calendar. Not for me. Not down here. My name is Arthur Vance. This voice you hear, it's been broadcasting for 38 years. 38 years since the first spore, the first city collapse, the first silence. 38 years since the world we knew evaporated. I speak into this microphone every night because someone has to. Someone has to remember the world that was, the people who were, and the choices we made. And maybe, just maybe, someone out there is still listening. Could be a scavenger with a jury-rig radio in the ruins of a bus. Could be a woman in a lighthouse keeping a fire alive with driftwood. Could be anyone who remembers the sound of a human voice. I wasn't made for this. I was a mechanical engineer, a man with plans, a sister I adored, and a world I thought I understood. Then the doors closed behind us, the spore rose, and the silence came. If you're hearing this, survive, and listen. Because this is my story. And maybe, in telling it, I remember that I'm still human. You ever think about the last normal day you had? I do. Every single day. Mine was in Seattle, 2027. I was 27, freshly out of college, working as a mechanical engineer. Not rich, not famous, not remarkable, just a guy who could make machines run smooth and efficient. My sister, Lydia, was finishing her environmental science degree. She loved the outdoors, soil samples, pressed flowers in her notebooks. She had a way of making the smallest things feel monumental. We had lost our parents in our teens, so it was always just the two of us. Lydia kept me anchored. I kept her grounded. Together, we thought we could face anything until the world itself turned against us. It started with a job offer I couldn't refuse. A private project near Cheyenne Mountain, Colorado. The pay was absurd, the location highly secure, and the client, Gordon Hightower. You've probably heard his name in whispers, even now. Billionaire, visionary, madman. The man was building a bunker, a fortress at the end of the world. I laughed at first. A doomsday prepper with too much money. But the money was real, and the work was clean. Ventilation shafts, water reclamation, filtration systems, the kind of thing I excelled at. I took the job. Lydia came to visit, and then she stayed. Hightower offered her position in the greenhouse staff. The pay was too good to resist, and the facility was immaculate. We thought it would be temporary. 6 months, maybe a year. Then back to normal life. Funny thing about hindsight, the sky can be blue while a storm brews on the horizon. The first report of infection came in early 2028. Texas counties going dark. Hospitals overwhelmed. People dying, then rising. The internet called them zombies. Scientists called it a fungal infection. Nobody understood how fast it spread, how it mutated, how the dead didn't stay dead. I remember the day Hightower called us all to Sublevel 1. Screens flashed images of chaos, overcrowded airports, highways clogged with fleeing cars, soldiers with barricades failing to hold the infected. He stood at the front, immaculate suit, calm, almost serene. "We will be safe," he said, "provided everyone fulfills their role, and no one leaves without explicit clearance." We sealed the bunker that day. The doors shut. The world above fell silent. And everything I thought I knew about life, family, and survival changed. The first weeks underground were surreal. Imagine a city of steel and concrete, humming with generators, lights, and the mechanical heartbeat of 1,000 machines. The air smelled sterile, clean, controlled. Everything had a place. Everyone had a job. I worked long hours aligning filtration tanks, calibrating sensors, ensuring ventilation shafts were airtight. I rarely saw Hightower, but when I did, it was always the same, a nod, measured, surveying his fortress like a chessboard. Lydia thrived in the greenhouse. She would talk to the plants, take meticulous notes, and somehow make life grow in an artificial, sunless world. Her diligence kept us nourished. Her presence kept us sane. But even as the machines hummed and the hydroponic lights glowed, the world outside was falling apart. Airports, cities, governments collapsing under the speed of the spore. News feeds went from active reports to looping clips, then vanished entirely. And then the radio. I began hearing voices, snippets of survivors, small enclaves, people broadcasting from basements and attics. Their words were brief, desperate, fleeting. I listened in silence. There was nothing we could do to help them. Nothing. And yet we listened, because it was all we had left. By the first year's end, the bunker had become our prison and our home. We learned to exist in shifts, generators, water systems, greenhouses, meals measured to the gram, ration cards to enforce order, drills for sealing doors, fortifying levels, preparing for any breach. And then I saw the infected, the first time, from a vented rooftop during a maintenance run. Their skin gray and blistered, eyes milky, movement slow but purposeful. It didn't feel real. Not then. Not until I realized that the dead could wait, could learn, could hunt. The first years underground, they weren't glamorous. Not in the slightest. Imagine being locked in a city made of concrete, steel, and humming machines, lights never fading, the air always recycled, clean, efficient, sterile, but a cage without walls, but one that pressed in anyway. The bunker had levels, sublevels, corridors stretching endlessly. Each level had a purpose. Mechanical rooms, generators, water filtration, greenhouses, living quarters, labs, security offices. Everything was redundantly engineered. Nothing was left to chance. Hightower spared no expense. But all that money couldn't fill the empty holes with life. Lydia kept the greenhouse alive. She had this way of making it feel real. The smell of wet soil, the faint orange glow of grow lights, the soft rustle of leaves. We ate mostly freeze-dried rations, measured and rationed, but the fresh vegetables she grew were miracles. Tomatoes, peppers, lettuce, herbs. Each harvest felt like a small victory. I, meanwhile, had the hum of machines, water reclamation, air filtration, generators. I memorized their rhythms, pumps whirring, valves clicking, fans spinning. I became part of the infrastructure. Without me, without my checks, the bunker could have failed. Nigel ran the radio. He was a quiet man, sharp, meticulous, always scanning frequencies for signs of life. Some nights, I'd hear him muttering under his breath in multiple languages, chasing signals that vanished as quickly as they appeared. Fairbanks was our last anchor to the old world of order. Ex-military, built like a tank, a presence that reminded us there were consequences for mistakes. He was the reason we still had walls between us and the chaos outside. And then there were the first signs of the world outside. The infected weren't just corpses walking. They were evolving, learning, watching, waiting. We saw them first during surface maintenance. Slow figures draped in ash and dust, eyes milky, skin blistered and gray, limbs twitching unnaturally. They moved in patterns, sometimes solitary, sometimes in small, coordinated groups. And the worst? They could be still for days, blending with rubble. It wasn't just fear that settled on us. It was awe, a terrible, horrible awe. The world had changed, and we were locked inside a tomb while it did. Daily life became ritualized. Every morning, system checks, water pumps, air filters, greenhouse nutrients, generator fuel levels, afternoon shifts in the greenhouse, evening radio sweeps, and always the quiet, silence pressing on us like water. We tried to keep ourselves sane, exercise in the small gym, reading from the library, meditation in the chapel, board games, conversations that sometimes turned to arguments. Sometimes I would stand by the air intake vents and listen for the wind. The wind sometimes carried faint whispers of the world outside, but it was never clear enough to give hope. And yet, hope existed in small flickers. A signal caught by Nigel, a survivor enclave broadcasting instructions, a faint shout over the static, always fleeting, always tenuous, but enough to remind us that the world above still breathed. By the second year, tensions began to fray. People whispered about morality, hiding while others died, choosing survival over compassion. Some staff began planning departures. Some tried and failed. Some never returned. We learned, quickly, that leaving was suicide. But staying wasn't salvation either. Every system was finite. Every generator would eventually fail. Every seed in the greenhouse had limits. And the spore would never stop. By year 3, Hightower commissioned a lab. Microbiologists, virologists, geneticists. They called themselves humanity's last line of defense. I saw hope flare again. And then sabotage destroyed it all. The lab was compromised. Foam sealed the room. Vials broken. Servers fried. Research lost. That's when the bunker truly began to crumble. Not physically, but in spirit. People stopped believing. Some left. Some gave up. And the rest of us, we endured. I endured. Lydia endured. Nigel, Fairbanks, we endured. We adapted to isolation, to silence, to the weight of watching the world die above our heads. We became ghosts living among machines, keeping the lights on, the air breathable, the water flowing, the plants alive. And every night I spoke into the radio. Messages, warnings, fragments of hope, maps, names of people I hadn't heard from in decades. All for someone out there. Or maybe just to hear my own voice, to remember I was still human. By the 3rd year, Hightower realized survival wasn't enough. He wanted to fix the world. Or at least, what was left of it. He turned 2 entire levels of the bunker into a laboratory, sealed chambers, negative pressure rooms, biohazard suits. Microbiologists, virologists, geneticists, all under guard. They called themselves the last line of defense for humanity. We called them the White Coats. Lydia got pulled in to assist. Cleaning, sterilizing, preparing samples from the greenhouse for fungal testing. She hated every minute of it, but she did it anyway. She always did. I watched her work in the glass rooms, the glow of UV lights reflecting on her glasses, hand shaking slightly from exhaustion but precise. The white coat began with optimism. Early tests on the spores showed possible inhibitors, compounds that slowed fungal growth in lab rats. Each minor success lit hope like a candle. We dared to think, maybe, just maybe, we could reverse this. But the spore, it wasn't normal. It evolved faster than they could track, adapting, mutating. Some test animals displayed neurological side effects, aggression, violent behavior, almost as if the cure was creating mini-infected. Arguments broke out. Ethics, priorities, survival. Some said testing had gone too far, that we were risking everything for a false promise. Others, including Hightower, insisted it was the only chance we had. And then came the sabotage. It was a Thursday night, alarms screaming, red emergency lights pulsing through every level. I ran to the lab with Fairbanks and Nigel. Foam was everywhere, the air acrid and heavy. Vials smashed, servers fried, research notes destroyed. Some of the white coats were unconscious, some gone entirely. No one admitted responsibility. Inside job, infiltrator, we never knew. What we knew was that the cure, the hope, had evaporated in minutes. After that, morale shattered. Staff members packed supplies and left. Convinced survival meant leaving the bunker, joining enclaves, or risking the surface. Some never returned. Hightail, he raised it first. Then, slowly, he withdrew, locked himself in his quarters, emerging only sporadically, a shadow of the man who built this fortress. The weight of failure hung on him like a physical thing. The rest of us, we continued our routines. Greenhouse rotations, generator checks, water filtration, radio sweeps for survivor transmissions, scans of the world outside, always listening, always hoping. By year 4, the bunker had changed. The holes were quieter. The wings once filled with people were dark and abandoned. We became smaller, tighter. Systems checks became rituals. Meals were rationed more strictly. And yet, the radio, it persisted. Static, faint signals, brief voices. Survivors somewhere, broadcasting their existence, sometimes instructions. The voices were fleeting, unreliable, but enough to remind us the world wasn't completely dead. We endured. We adapted. We lived in the shadow of failure, with the knowledge that hope was fragile, fleeting, and could be destroyed in a night. After the lab, everything changed. Not the walls, not the systems. Us, the people. Some left. Some disappeared. Some stopped speaking altogether. Empty corridors swallowed their absence. Bunks sat unused. Lockers unopened. Offices dark. Silence pressed against us like a living thing. We tried to maintain order. Fairbanks insisted on patrols, drills, rotations. Lydia kept the greenhouse alive. I kept the mechanical heart of the bunker beating. Nigel scoured the airwaves for any sign of life. But the air was thick with unease. The first mutiny wasn't violent. Just people saying no. Saying they wouldn't follow routines anymore. Small groups left, taking rations, tools, and supplies. Security tried to stop them. Some returned injured. Some never returned. By year 7, the world above was no longer a rumor. We had seen glimpses. Vent maintenance, surface runs, figures shuffling in the distance, gray, blistered, eyes milky, infected, yes, but evolved. We began to call the most dangerous ferals. They could remain still for days, mimicking corpses. Move in groups, almost tactical. Wait to ambush. And people had changed too. Survivor enclaves cropped up. Floating rafts on the Great Lakes, fortified towns behind medieval walls in Europe, a militia near Flagstaff Ceiling Canyon. All broadcasts faded too quickly. Some were real, some traps. Cannibalistic raiders learned to mimic survivor signals. Too many never returned. Hightower disappeared entirely in year 7. No announcement. Cameras showed him leaving with 2 guards, backpacks over their shoulders. Then nothing. No word. No instruction. The remaining people fractured further. Some insisted we find him. Some said survival meant adapting. Some left, abandoning us entirely. And the rest, we endured. We consolidated the bunker. Shut down wings to save fuel. Lights, generators, ventilation ducts, everything minimized. The greenhouse remained a lifeline. The radio remained our voice to the world. Life became ritual. Morning, generator checks, water, air filters. Afternoon, greenhouse and hydroponics. Evening, radio sweeps. The days blurred together. Sleep was interrupted by nightmares. Dreams of the dead, of the ones who left, of the ferals waiting outside. Nigel picked up signals sometimes. Faint voices, snatches of languages we barely understood. Russian, Mandarin, Spanish. Survivors. Out there. Still alive, but always fleeting. Always ending in static. The ferals became bolder. We saw them on camera once, near the bunker's perimeter. Not attacking, yet just watching, waiting. And we realized the world outside wasn't just dangerous. It had evolved, and we were ghosts living in a machine. By the 25th year, the bunker population had dwindled to a handful. Me, Lydia, Nigel, Fairbanks. The last of the original staff, holding the fort. Everyone else gone, dead, disappeared, or gone to risk the surface. We maintained essential systems. Power, water, air, greenhouse, radio, and we began planning. Always planning. Because one day, the bunker wouldn't be enough. And one day, the world outside would force us out. Arthur's voice drops, soft and haunted. Next broadcast, I'll tell you about the 35th year, about the first clear contact with survivors outside, about the decision we had to make, stay in the sanctuary we knew, or step into a world that had forgotten us. 38 years. 38 years since the spar first swept through the cities, since the world locked its doors and left us behind. 38 years living in a city built underground, humming with machines, breathing recycled air, waiting. Waiting for what? A rescue? A miracle? A voice back? It's just the 4 of us now. Me, Lydia, Nigel, Fairbanks. Everyone else, gone. Some left. Some didn't make it. Some simply disappeared into the shadows of the bunker. Life is routine. Generator checks in the morning. Greenhouse rotations in the afternoon. Radio sweeps in the evening. Every night, I speak into the void. I warn, I advise, I remember. Sometimes, the faintest response crackles through the static. Most nights, nothing. Then, we heard them. A strong signal, clear and alive. Not static, not a whisper. A group calling themselves the Riverland Federation, broadcasting from near the Mississippi. They had farmland, a militia, some rudimentary technology capable of reaching us. And they were organized. They were alive. We didn't believe it at first. Too many false hopes, too many voices that faded into silence. But the signal persisted. Detailed instructions, requests for coordinates, advice for survival. The bunker had been our tomb and our sanctuary, but it was dying. Supplies were limited. Generators wearing out. Greenhouse yields declining. Staying meant slow death. Leaving meant everything else. Risk, exposure, infection, mutants, ferals, raiding groups. And yet, for the first time in decades, the idea of leaving felt like hope. We prepared. Every ration counted. Every tool, every weapon, every spare filter. We fortified entrances, replaced vent grates with heavier steel. We packed backpacks with hydroponic nutrients, seeds, water purification tablets. We rehearsed the exit, practiced the route from our deepest level to the surface. And then, the night before we left, I took the radio. I spoke into the void. I gave our names, our intentions. A farewell broadcast. Maybe someone heard. Maybe someone knew we were coming. Lydia stood beside me, her hand in mine. Her eyes reflected the grow lights of the greenhouse, weary but determined. Nigel checked the shortwave again, whispering confirmations. Fairbanks cleaned weapons in silence, always alert, ready for the worst. We slept as best we could. Not that sleep means anything when decades of nightmares live in the shadows. And then we opened the hatch. The dawn was gray, heavy with ash and rain. The air smelled like dust, smoke, and decay. Colorado Springs was unrecognizable. Streets broken, trees scorched, buildings gutted. And yet it breathed. Life persisted, stubborn, defiant. We moved cautiously. Every shadow a potential threat. Every sound a warning. Ferals and mutated, infected roamed the outskirts. We avoided them. We listened. We remembered the old lessons. Move slowly. Leave no trace. Always watch each other's backs. The signal from the Riverland Federation guided us. Days of travel. Skirting radioactive zones. Crossing rivers where currents hid dangers. Listening to faint signals. Responding with coded messages Nigel had prepared. We were ghosts, moving across a world that had forgotten us. Yet we were alive. And every step we took was a step into freedom or into death. We couldn't tell the difference yet. The Riverland Federation welcomed us cautiously. Their leader, a man named Elias, eyed us like we were strange animals, and maybe we were. Decades underground left their mark. We spoke little at first, exchanging names, supplies, and survival notes. They had farmland. They had livestock. They had walls, fences, and guns. They survived. And for the first time, I understood that survival didn't mean hiding. It meant choosing life actively every day. We set up temporary quarters, shared knowledge about plants, water purification, generator repair. Our bunker skills were invaluable. In return, they taught us about the surface world, which zones were dangerous, where resources could be scavenged, how ferals had evolved. It was fragile, a fragile beginning, but it was life. And after 38 years, that fragile beginning felt like a miracle. To anyone listening, we left the bunker today. The world is broken, but alive. Humanity still fights. Some of us survived, and some of us will adapt. If you hear this, don't stop, don't give up. Build, protect, and remember, because that is the only way we remain human. This is Arthur Vance, signing off, but not gone. Keep listening, keep moving, keep living. The hatch opened, and the air hit us like a slap. 38 years underground, and the sky still took my breath away. Gray, heavy, ash-laden. Rain fell in uneven sheets. The wind carried the stench of burned wood, wet soil, and the faint, unmistakable rot of the world outside. The streets of Colorado Springs were silent. Broken cars littered the roads. Skyscrapers were gutted shells. Trees clawed skyward with blackened limbs. The city looked dead, but movement caught my eye. A group of figures shuffling along a street. Ferals. We froze, held our breaths, and remembered every lesson from 38 years underground. Observe, don't engage, avoid detection. Days passed like this, every step measured, every shadow a possible threat. Our rations were sparse but manageable, thanks to supplies from the bunker. Water purification tablets kept us hydrated. Hydroponic nutrients tucked into our packs were a safety net, a reminder of the life we carried with us. Nigel's radio became our lifeline. Every week's signal from the Riverland Federation was scrutinized, deciphered, and cross-referenced with the landmarks we passed. They guided us carefully, knowing the dangers of the surface. We saw the world's scars, radioactive zones, buildings turned to glassy wasteland from distant nuclear strikes, cities swallowed by ash and fungal overgrowth. And yet, pockets of life persisted. Small groups of survivors moving cautiously, farms hidden behind barricades, children laughing near safe zones. Life endured stubbornly, defiantly. By the 25th day above ground, we reached a fortified checkpoint. 2 guards spotted us, weapons drawn. I raised my hand slowly, repeating our code phrase. Recognition dawned. They lowered their rifles. Through a gate, we saw it. The Riverland Federation, thriving in a stretch of farmland near the Mississippi. Walls repaired, crops growing, livestock scattered in pens. People alive in a way I had almost forgotten. The Federation's leader, Elias, approached, wary but curious. "Yo, from underground," he said, studying our worn clothes and pale, cautious eyes. "Yes," I replied. "We've been isolated 38 years. He didn't smile, didn't look relieved, just nodded. "You survived. That's enough for now." We were escorted into the settlement. Introductions, examinations, inventorying of supplies. Our knowledge of hydroponics, generators, and water systems made us valuable. In return, we learned about the surface world, zones dominated by ferals, safe paths, enclaves of survivors, and the ever-present threat of mutated infected. The days blurred into weeks. We repaired fences, expanded farmland, shared knowledge, taught children basic engineering and gardening. And every night, I took the radio, broadcasting again into the void, but now with a new purpose, warnings, survival tips, and encouragement to any listening survivors. The world hadn't healed. It hadn't even begun to heal. But humanity had adapted, mutated, and endured, and we had joined them. 38 years. 38 years of darkness, of silence, of learning to endure. And now, we've found life, not just survival. We found a beginning, fragile and uncertain, but real. Lydia walks through the fields each morning, her hands in the soil, her heart still tethered to life. Nigel checks radios for signals that might connect other survivors. Fairbanks patrols the perimeter, vigilant, unyielding. And I broadcast. I remember. I teach. I warn. I hope. To anyone hearing this, life is still possible. Survival isn't enough. Rebuild, protect, remember, and never stop listening. This is Arthur Vance. 38 years underground. 38 years surviving. And finally, 38 years learning to live again. This is Mara Listen. If anyone is out there, hear me. I don't know who's listening. I don't even know if anyone is listening. But the airwaves are mine now, and I will speak. 25 years. 25 years since the infection first spread like wildfire across continents. Cities fell. Governments vanished. People either survived or became something else entirely. Some of those who survived became monsters of another kind, raiders, opportunists, worse. I am one of the few who live in the ruins of the old world, not underground like some of you might have heard, but on the surface. The storms keep people away. The fungus keeps the dead contained. Mostly. My home is what remains of an abandoned weather station in the Rocky Mountains. It's battered, wind-torn, and frozen half the year, but it's mine, and it keeps me alive. I didn't plan to be the voice on this frequency. I didn't plan to survive at all. Once, I was a climatologist, obsessed with patterns, forecasts, and data. The apocalypse was theory, a statistical probability. I never imagined it could be reality. But reality doesn't care about plans. I keep the transmitter running from dawn until the first stars appear, broadcasting survival tips, maps of safe zones, warnings of feral infected or raider gangs, and sometimes just stories. Stories about the sun when it used to rise over my city, about snow falling softly over quiet streets, about a world that felt infinite. Sometimes I imagine someone hearing this. A kid with a radio rig scavenged from an old library. A lone traveler moving across the plains. Maybe just one person out there remembers what a human voice is supposed to sound like. The weather station has 4 floors. The top floor houses the radio transmitter, weather instruments, and my makeshift lab for survival research. The second floor is living space. A bed, shelves of canned food, a stove that still works thanks to propane reserves. The third floor is storage. Tools, fuel, mechanical parts, anything I might need to fix the station if it breaks. The bottom floor. I don't go there often. That's where the storm shelter is, reinforced against ferals, nuclear ash, or worse. Every day is routine, structured to keep me alive. Morning, I check the instruments. Barometers, thermometers, wind gauges. The storms above aren't just weather. They are the world's pulse now. Afternoon, I check my traps, repair what's broken, gather supplies from the few abandoned buildings within a 10-mile radius. Evening, I transmit. I scan the frequencies. I hope. Hope is dangerous in a world like this. But it's also the only thing that keeps me moving. 2 nights ago, I caught something on the airwaves. Faint, distorted, almost drowned in static. Someone else. A voice. Not a raider. Not a feral. Human. Coordinates. Thrust point. Need supplies? It repeated 3 times before disappearing. I don't know if it was survivor, or a trap, or a hallucination from exhaustion and cold. But it was the first human voice in years that didn't threaten me, and it changed something. It reminded me that isolation isn't survival. It's waiting for someone, anyone, to break the silence. I replied, carefully, slowly, and for the first time in a long time, I felt the spark of connection. The night I heard the voice, I didn't sleep. I checked my maps, my instruments, and my gear. Thrust point. That was the only clue. A settlement, a survivor camp, or maybe something worse. I decided to go. Carefully, slowly. I packed what I could carry, a pack with canned food, water purification tablets, first aid supplies, extra batteries for the radio, and a small hunting rifle. Every step outside the weather station was calculated. Every shadow could hide ferals or raiders. Every sound demanded attention. The first day was silent. Snow dusted the ruined streets of what had once been a small mountain town. Burnt-out cars littered the roads. Roofs had collapsed. Chimneys caved in. And everywhere, the air smelled of ash, wet wood, and decay. By nightfall, I set up a small camp near the tree line. Fires were risky. Smoke could attract unwanted attention, but I needed warmth. I huddled under a tarp, listening to the wind howl over the peaks, thinking about how fragile life had become. On the second day, movement caught my eye. 6 figures, half covered in ash and gray fungal growth. Ferals. They weren't human, not anymore. Their eyes milky, hands twitching unnaturally. I froze, remembered everything I'd learned. Observe, avoid, never engage unless necessary. They moved slowly, in patterns, almost purposeful. They were scouting, hunting, surviving in their own grotesque way. I held my breath until they passed, silent shadows against the ruined landscape. That night, I broadcast again. A simple message. This is Mara, listen. I heard Thrust Point. If you're out there, I'm coming. I mean no harm. Silence. Static. But I didn't give up. Days blended into nights. Snowstorms. Rock slides. Broken roads. Food was scarce. I scavenged abandoned cabins and towns, but everything had been stripped decades ago. Canned goods, rusted tools, and bones, human and otherwise, were all that remained. The storms weren't just weather, they were predators. Blinding snow, wind strong enough to knock a person off their feet, hail sharp as nails. The Rocky Mountains had become an untamed, dangerous wilderness. And yet, I moved forward. Every step brought me closer to Thrust Point. Every mile, a reminder that isolation had cost me time, but not resolve. On the 5th day, I saw smoke rising from a ridge. Not wildfires, controlled, deliberate. A settlement, human, alive. I approached carefully. No sudden movements. No lights. My rifle ready, but my heart hoping. From behind a ridge, I saw them, tents reinforced with metal sheets, a small watchtower, people moving with purpose. I couldn't tell if they saw me yet, but the radio crackled in my pack. A familiar voice, faint but real. Mara, is that you? I smiled, even in the biting wind. A voice, confirmation that I was not alone. That survival wasn't just endurance. It could lead to connection. I stepped forward, carefully, and the journey to Thrust Point truly began. Thrust Point, the name felt almost poetic after 25 years of silence. When I crested the ridge, I saw the settlement more clearly. Tents reinforced with salvaged metal and wood, a small tower standing sentinel, solar panels scattered across rooftops. People moved deliberately, carrying supplies, tending fires, keeping watch. I didn't announce myself at first. Years of isolation had taught me caution. I watched, listened, tried to understand their routines. Their guards noticed me almost immediately, rifles trained, eyes sharp. "Who goes there?" a man shouted from the tower. I'm Mara, listen," I said, raising my hands. "I'm not here to fight. I heard your broadcast." A tense silence, then footsteps, heavy, deliberate, approaching. A woman emerged from the main tent, mid-30s, wiry and sharp-eyed. "Mara, listen," she asked. The radio voice. I nodded. "Yes, I've been broadcasting from the mountains. 4 years. I came when I heard you." She studied me. Slowly, she nodded. "You're lucky. Most people out there don't survive the storms or the ferals." They escorted me into the settlement. Inside, it was life, fires, cooking smells, children laughing quietly, people repairing tools and clothes. The first sense of normalcy I'd felt in decades. I learned quickly that Frost Point was a fragile but organized settlement. Leadership, Elias, the settlement's founder, pragmatic, cautious, but fair. Security, guard rotations, perimeter alarms, early warning posts for ferals. Supplies, limited, rationed carefully. Foraging parties and scavengers manage resources. Communication, a small radio tower capable of long-distance signals, managed by a technician named Ran. Trust wasn't immediate. I had to prove myself. I demonstrated my knowledge of weather patterns, early warning for storms, and survival strategies for harsh mountain climates. I helped repair tents, reinforce fences, and taught others how to purify water efficiently. Little by little, they accepted me, not fully, but cautiously. Even in Frost Point, danger was never far. Ferals had evolved, using shadows and terrain to their advantage. Raiders attempted to approach under cover of night. One scouting party returned with a chilling report. A horde of ferals had learned to mimic human sounds, a terrifying echo of life meant to lure the unwary. I shared my knowledge from years of isolation. Traps, warning signals, and ways to navigate through snowstorms without detection. My presence made survival slightly more manageable, but the threat never disappeared. For the first time in decades, I wasn't alone. I shared stories over firelight, helped teach children about plants and water, and contributed to long-term survival plans. Each day reminded me that survival isn't just about food or shelter. It's about connection, purpose, and the fragile bonds we rebuild. At night, I returned to my radio. I broadcast warnings, updates, and encouragement. But now, my messages had a new meaning. I wasn't just reaching into the void. I was linking isolated pockets of humanity, like Frost Point and other hidden enclaves, together through sound waves. I had left isolation behind. And while the world was still dangerous, broken, and unkind, it was alive. And so was I. The days after I arrived at Frost Point were a balance of routine and vigilance. The settlement was alive, but fragile. Every morning, we checked fences, traps, and lookouts. Every night, we broadcast warnings to anyone listening. Then came the first real test. It was late evening when Ren, the radio technician, caught unusual static on the northern frequency. At first, it seemed like interference from a distant storm, but then a pattern emerged, human voices, distorted, shouting, then silence. Raiders, Wren whispered. Or ferals. I added. My heart sank. Elias convened a quick meeting. The perimeter alarms were set, guards took positions, and I ran through my notes on tactics from years surviving outside. We needed to be ready for anything. Around midnight, a shadow moved along the ridge. The first feral, a hulking figure, pale and twisted with fungal growths, emerged from the darkness. Then more. 6, 7, then dozens. They used the terrain, climbing silently, approaching under cover of wind and snow. Simultaneously, distant shouts indicated raiders moving up the valley, taking advantage of the chaos. We were caught between two threats. I coordinated with Fairbanks, Elias, and the guard rotation. Traps were triggered, barricades reinforced, and warning flares lit the sky. Fires crackled along the perimeter to keep the ferals away from vulnerable structures. For hours, we fought, not with guns alone. We had learned over decades that conserving ammo was crucial. Noise, fire, and clever maneuvers slowed the attackers. We guided ferals into natural pitfalls, diverted raiders into ambushes, and defended the settlement with what little we had. By dawn, the ridge was silent. Bodies, shadows, and frost. Frost Point had survived. The settlement breathed again, but the battle left its mark. Injuries damaged the tents and frayed nerves, but it also solidified bonds. People who had been wary of me before now saw the value of my years outside the walls. Children, who had never seen outsiders, peeked from behind barricades, curious but cautious. I showed them how to reinforce shelters and recognize signs of danger. I realized that survival isn't just about enduring. It's about teaching, guiding, and protecting the next generation. A week after the attack, while scanning frequencies, I picked up something extraordinary, a faint but clear signal from the east. Another enclave. Someone else alive, broadcasting coordinates, resources, and warnings about ferals. I shared the information with Elias and the council. The idea of connecting settlements, sharing knowledge, and rebuilding a network of survivors became real. Frost Point wasn't just a refuge anymore. It was part of a fragile chain of humanity. At night, I broadcast to the east and west. I told them Frost Point was alive. I warned of ferals, raiders, and storms. I offered help, and for the first time, voices answered. Not many, but enough to remind me that the void was no longer empty. The decision wasn't easy. Frost Point had survived, but the world outside was vast, broken, and unpredictable. Yet the faint signal from the east couldn't be ignored. Another enclave, another chance to link survivors. Elias called a council meeting. Some were eager to help, to explore, to reconnect. Others feared the unknown, ferals, raiders, storms, even betrayal. I argued for the expedition. Carefully, slowly, I laid out the plan. A small team, light and fast, to reduce exposure and conserve resources. Rations for 10 days. Extra fuel, medical supplies, and repair kits for weapons. Night travel when ferals are less active. Use high ridges to scout. Avoid valleys where raiders might hide. Daily radio updates. If anything went wrong, Frost Point would know where we were. Elias nodded, reluctantly approving the mission. We left just before dawn. Myself, Lydia, a young tracker trained at Frost Point, skilled in navigation and survival. Ren, the radio technician, and two guards, Marcus and Hale. We moved silently across frozen ridges, snow crunching under boots, wind howling in our faces. The first 2 days were uneventful. We crossed broken roads, abandoned towns, and forests frozen in time. But the silence was unnerving. Every shadow seemed alive. Every gust of wind sounded like footsteps. On the third night, the feral struck. Dozens of pale, fungal-coated shapes emerged from the trees, their eyes milky, bodies twitching unnaturally. We didn't fire immediately. Noise would attract more. Instead, we formed a tight circle, using flares and fire lines to push them back. Marcus and Hale fired carefully, conserving ammo, taking down the closest attackers. Lydia guided us along a narrow ridge, her instincts sharp. I realized that survival wasn't just about tools or weapons. It was about teamwork, instinct, and trust. By morning, we had lost some supplies, but everyone survived. The ferals retreated. On the 5th day, we spotted smoke rising from a valley. Cautious, we approached from the windward side. Through binoculars, we saw tents, crops, and movement. People alive, just as the radio had promised. I transmitted. This is Mara Ellison of Frost Point. We come in peace. We've received your signal. Please respond. Static at first, then a voice, faint but clear. Mara, is that really you? We've been waiting 24 years. I smiled, feeling the weight of decades lift slightly. Human voices, human life, connection. It was real. We approached slowly, weapons lowered but ready. The Eastern Enclave's leader, a woman named Sarah, emerged, her face wary but not hostile. Frost Point, she asked. Yes, I'm Mara. We want to help. Share knowledge. Connect survivors. She nodded slowly. Then you're welcome, for now, but trust is earned, not given. Over the next days, we exchanged information, supplies, and warnings. Sarah's enclave had survived through careful planning, using the terrain to their advantage, controlling small rivers and crops, and defending against both raiders and ferals. I realized at Frost Point and this new enclave could form the first link in a network of human settlements, sharing knowledge, resources, and protection. It was fragile, precarious, but it was hope. The first week of the Eastern Enclave was tense. Frost Point had trained me to survive, but trust wasn't automatic. Sarah's people had lived isolated for decades, relying on strict routines, walls, and vigilance. Outsiders were unpredictable. I worked alongside Lydia, Marcus, Hale, and Ren to prove our value. We repaired irrigation systems, reinforced shelters, and mapped safe routes for patrols. Slowly, the walls of suspicion began to crumble. We spent hours around fires, sharing stories and techniques. Frost Point taught the Eastern Enclave about winter survival, snow traps, and how to detect ferals early. The Eastern Enclave taught us camouflage, advanced food preservation, and how to grow crops in marginal soil. Every lesson was a brick in a bridge, connecting two isolated pockets of humanity. It wasn't all progress. One night, scouts reported raiders moving in the valleys below. Mara, Marcus, and Sarah planned a counter-ambush. The raiders were fast, opportunistic, and heavily armed, using terrain, flays, and diversion tactics. We funneled them into narrow passes. Fire lines and sound traps slowed them. When necessary, precise rifle fire ended the threat. The raiders were defeated, but the cost was clear. Supplies were depleted, and vigilance had to remain constant. Wren worked tirelessly to upgrade the radios. We began broadcasting. Frost Point and the Eastern Enclave are alive. We are rebuilding. Survivors, if you hear this, come closer, but cautiously. We will help you survive. For the first time in decades, voices answered. Not many, but enough to remind us we weren't alone. The network was forming, slowly, fragilely, but it was a start. At night, I'd stand outside, looking at the snow-covered peaks. 25 years of survival had been long, lonely, and brutal. Decades of silence underground, decades of storms and ferals above. And now, voices, connections, purpose. Lydia and I would talk quietly about what life might look like if we could connect more enclaves, about children who might grow up knowing the sky, not just the walls of bunkers or tents. About hope. I realized that survival was no longer enough. We had to rebuild. Not just structures, not just walls, but the human network, knowledge, and trust. The months after connecting with the Eastern Enclave were a whirlwind of activity. Frost Point and the Enclave worked to strengthen defenses, expand food production, and, most importantly, reach out. We sent scouts north, west, and even south through dangerous passes, using coded radio transmissions to avoid detection by raiders. Our teams mapped safe routes through the mountains, valleys, and abandoned towns. We discovered isolated survivors living in caves, attics, and small encampments. Some joined willingly. Others were suspicious, fearful of ferals, raiders, or betrayal. I traveled alongside Lydia and Marcus to one northern cluster of survivors. 5 families hiding in an abandoned hydroelectric plant. They were malnourished, scared, and mistrustful. But over days of careful communication, shared food, and teaching survival skills, we gained their trust. By the end of the week, they agreed to join the network. The realization hit me. Every person we connected made survival exponentially easier, not just physically, but psychologically. Humans were resilient, but only if they had each other. Our success drew attention. Feral populations had learned patterns, using shadows and mimicry to ambush scavengers. One scouting mission nearly ended in disaster when a feral horde surrounded a small team near a frozen river. We adapted quickly. Tripwires with bells and flares to warn of movement. Fire barriers in strategic locations. Silent movement training for scouts. We realized ferals were evolving, not just physically, but tactically. Every encounter forced us to learn, adapt, and survive smarter. As the network grew, leadership became complex. Elias and Sarah were pragmatic, but tensions rose. Should we risk lives to expand the network further into unknown territories? How do we ration limited supplies fairly across multiple settlements? Who decides which survivors are rescued and which are left behind if the danger is too great? I found myself increasingly involved in these decisions, acting as a bridge between groups, helping mediate disputes, and sharing knowledge from decades of survival. The weight of responsibility was immense, but necessary. Wren upgraded our network. Now, broadcasts could reach hundreds of miles if conditions allowed. Survivors answered. Some were desperate, some cautious, some incoherent after years of isolation, but all were alive. I broadcast updates, weather warnings, survival tips, and encouragement. Sometimes I read old stories, teaching about the past world. My voice became a tether for those clinging to life. The realization was profound. Radio waves were more than communication. They were hope. At night, I stood on the ridge overlooking Frost Point in the eastern enclave. Lights flickered in tents. Fires burned along pathways, and the mountains echoed with distant wind. Decades of survival had taught me the fragility of life, the ruthlessness of nature, and the unpredictability of humanity. But now, for the first time, I saw the possibility of restoration. Not a return to the old world, but a chance to create something new. A network of survivors, connected by trust, knowledge, and the fragile, persistent human voice. And I knew one thing. As long as we could speak, as long as someone listened, humanity would endure. The network was growing. What started as 2 settlements, Frost Point in the eastern enclave, was now 3, then 4, then 5 enclaves scattered across the Rockies and into the valleys. Each group was unique. Some practiced strict self-defense, some focused on farming, others scavenged technology and supplies. My role had expanded beyond survival. I was a communicator, a mediator, a strategist. We planned our first major cooperative operation, securing a larger territory to grow food and provide shelter for the growing population. Survey teams mapped abandoned farmlands, rivers, and defunct roads. Scouts identified safe zones and feral territories to avoid. Barricades, traps, and watchtowers were constructed along strategic points. The work was grueling. Food had to be rationed carefully. Tools, fuel, and medical supplies were in limited supply. But the combined effort of multiple enclaves brought a sense of unity that I hadn't felt in decades. As we expanded, threats multiplied. Feral populations had learned to move around settlements, sometimes attacking at night or during storms. Raiders became bolder, targeting supply routes and weakly defended outposts. One night, while coordinating radio communications, Wren intercepted a distress call. A raider gang had trapped an outlying farming enclave. We responded immediately. I led a mixed team of scouts and fighters, navigating treacherous snow-covered terrain to reach the enclave. The raiders had set traps, using fire and noise to divert attention. Feral scouts were mixed with human threats, making it difficult to distinguish friend from foe. We used decoys, flays, and silent approaches to rescue survivors and repel the attackers. By dawn, the enclave was safe, but the coast was clear. The world above was not only dangerous, it was evolving. The network wasn't just about defense. We had to negotiate alliances, mediate disputes, and maintain fairness. Each enclave had its own leadership, priorities, and fears. Some viewed outsiders with suspicion. Others saw them as potential threats to their limited resources. I helped establish a council. Representatives from each enclave gathered, sometimes via long-distance radio if travel was impossible, to share information, coordinate defenses, and plan future expansions. It wasn't perfect. Arguments erupted over resource distribution, security protocols, and strategies for expansion. But slowly, we learned to work together. Radio had become more than a survival tool. It was a lifeline. Each broadcast connected survivors, coordinated supply runs, warned of ferals, and shared medical or agricultural advice. Sometimes, at night, I'd read old stories, passages from books, or personal journals to remind people of what we had lost and what we could still preserve. Listeners responded, occasionally providing coordinates, resources, or advice of their own. It was fragile, but it worked. Voices in the dark answered voices in the dark. And that, more than barricades, more than weapons, was what made survival possible. Standing on the ridge above Frost Point, I looked down at the network of settlements slowly taking shape. Fires flickered in valleys. Fences lined perimeters. Scouts moved along trails between enclaves. Radio signal connected us like invisible threads. The world was still broken. The ferals were still out there. Raiders still threatened us. Storms still buried roads and destroyed crops. But for the first time, I felt something decades of isolation had denied me. Control, not over the world itself, but over our destiny. The network was fragile, but it was alive. And so was humanity. The network had matured. Frost Point, the eastern enclave, and several smaller settlements formed a fragile chain of survival across the mountains and valleys. But the world was not done testing us. One autumn, scouts reported an unprecedented feral migration. Hundreds, perhaps thousands, moving south through valleys we had once deemed safe. Unlike previous attacks, these ferals showed coordination, almost intelligence. I led a joint task force with Lydia, Marcus, Hale, and representatives from the Eastern Enclave. Together, we devised strategies. Choke points, narrow valleys and frozen rivers are prepared as traps. Noise diversions, sound decoys and flares guided the ferals into controlled zones. Fires and barriers, used sparingly to prevent spread, but enough to protect settlements. The battle lasted days. Exhaustion, frostbite, and injuries tested every survivor. But slowly, the tide turned. The ferals were pushed back. Casualties were significant, but morale remained intact. At the same time, raider gangs tried to exploit the chaos. One group infiltrated a northern enclave, stealing supplies and attempting to turn survivors against each other. Through radio coordination and rapid response teams, we reclaimed the enclave, captured the raiders, and reinforced security protocols. The network had grown strong enough to withstand internal threats, not just external ones. With the feral wave neutralized, we focused on linking more distant survivors. Mara coordinated long-range scouting missions using maps, old roads, and high-frequency radio. A small enclave in the Rockies agreed to join after witnessing the network's response to the feral and raider threats. A group of engineers discovered an abandoned hydroelectric station. With our help, they restarted a small power grid for local settlements. Each new connection strengthened the network, allowing resource sharing, knowledge exchange, and mutual defense. The world was still broken. Decades of devastation had left scars. But for the first time, Mara realized humanity was not just surviving. It was learning to rebuild. At night, Mara stood atop a ridge overlooking settlements below, fires flickering, radio towers blinking, scouts moving through the valleys. 26 years of solitude, fear, and struggle had led to this moment. The slow, fragile rebirth of civilization. I broadcasted across the network. Survivors, hear me, we are not alone. We are connected. We are building again. Your courage, your vigilance, your voices, they matter. Together, we endure. Together, we will reclaim the world. Static carried my words far beyond Frost Point, past the mountains, past ruined cities, into pockets of humanity waiting to be found. And for the first time in decades, I heard responses. Multiple voices, multiple echoes, human voices. The sun rose over Frost Point for the first time in decades, not just as light, but as a symbol. We had endured ferals, raiders, storms, isolation, and fear. But now, the world seemed to breathe with us. The network of enclaves, Frost Point, the Eastern Settlement, the Northern Hydroelectric Station, and several smaller groups, had solidified into a true coalition. We shared resources, coordinated patrols, and communicated through upgraded radio networks that connected across hundreds of miles. Engineers collaborated to repair water systems, power grids, and basic infrastructure. Farmers shared seeds, techniques, and crop rotations to stabilize food production. Scouts mapped territories, establishing safe routes for travel and communication. For the first time, survivors could plan beyond immediate survival. They could dream. The ferals, though never completely gone, had been pushed into isolated territories. Raiders had learned that the coalition would not tolerate attacks. Their numbers dwindled as they faced coordinated resistance. With these threats managed, Mara led expeditions to gather knowledge, recover old technology, and teach settlements how to protect themselves. Every mission strengthened the bonds between enclaves, forming a tapestry of human resilience. Children began learning from elders, passing down knowledge of both survival and the pre-apocalypse world. Stories of the old world were shared to preserve memory, culture, and identity. Radio broadcasts shifted from emergency warnings to lessons, storytelling, and news of small victories. I stood on the ridge overlooking the settlements, lights flickering in tents, the hydroelectric station glowing in the distance, scouts moving silently along the paths. I reflected on 27 years of this life, the long isolation underground, the endless vigilance against ferals, the uncertainty of each day, the deaths and departures of friends and companions. And yet, here we were, connected, alive, hopeful. I picked up the radio and spoke into the quiet hum of the static. Survivors, wherever you are, hear this. You are not alone. You are part of something greater. Humanity endures not through walls, not through weapons, but through connection, through courage, through listening and responding. Together, we rebuild. Together, we reclaim the world. Static hissed, but voices returned, one after another, from enclaves far and near. Voices that hadn't been heard in decades. Stories shared. Help offered. Plans made. Human life, in all its messy, resilient glory, responded. For the first time in decades, I felt the truth of it. Survival was no longer enough. We were alive, yes, but now we were building. Not merely to exist, but to live, to connect, to endure. The coalition began a long, patient restoration. Roads were cleared. Small schools and workshops were established. Communications extended to enclaves not yet connected. Knowledge was preserved. Engineering, agriculture, medicine, history. The apocalypse had broken the world. But human connection, our ingenuity, courage, and voice was rebuilding it. And as I transmitted one last message at night, I realized the radio had never just carried warnings. It carried hope. It carried life. And in the static, the voices of the living answered back. We endured. We survived. We would thrive.